The sound of breaking ceramic echoed through the living room like a gunshot in the quiet Tuesday afternoon. Elena Thompson stared at the mess at her feet, dark soil scattered across the hardwood floor, the green leaves of Robert's prized ficus plant wilting among the broken pieces of the decorative pot. But it wasn't the plant or the pottery that made her blood run cold. It was what had been hidden inside the false bottom of that pot for 25 years. A small brass key gleamed among the dirt. A memory card, carefully wrapped in plastic, sat beside it. And there, folded and yellowed with age, was a letter written in her father's distinctive handwriting, a father who had died 10 years ago, leaving her everything in his will. A father who had supposedly trusted his son-in-law Robert with managing the family business until Elena was ready to take over. Elena's hands trembled as she picked up the letter, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The envelope was addressed to her in her father's careful script. For Elena, open only if something happens to me and you suspect Robert is not who he claims to be. The room seemed to spin around her. Robert, her husband of 25 years, the man who had comforted her through her father's death, who had taken over the family company, temporarily, and never given it back. The man who claimed the business had failed, who said they had to sell everything to pay debts that Elena had never seen documented. The man who had convinced her to sign papers she barely read because she trusted him completely. With shaking fingers, she unfolded the letter. Her father's words seemed to jump off the page. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then my worst fears about Robert have come true. I discovered he has been stealing from the company for years. I have evidence hidden in the places only you would know to look. The key will open a safety deposit box at First National Bank Box 247. The memory card contains security footage and financial records. Robert is not the man you think he is. He married you for money, and he will destroy everything I built unless you stop him. I love you and I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. Dad. Elena sank into her father's old armchair, the same chair Robert had wanted to throw away after the funeral. Her mind raced back through 25 years of marriage, searching for signs she had missed. Robert's insistence on handling all their finances. His anger whenever she asked questions about the family business. The way he had rushed her through signing documents after her father's death, claiming it was just legal formalities. The expensive cars he bought, the lavish vacations, the designer clothes, all while telling her they were barely getting by. She looked around the house, their house which had actually belonged to her family for 3 generations. Robert had convinced her to put it in both their names for tax purposes. Everything she thought she knew about her life was crumbling like the broken pot at her feet. The front door slammed, and Elena heard Robert's voice calling out his usual greeting. Elena. I'm home. Did you have a good day? She quickly gathered the letter, key and memory card, shoving them into her purse just as Robert appeared in the doorway. He was still handsome at 52 with his silver hair and expensive suit, but now Elena looked at him and saw a stranger. A thief. A liar who had stolen not just her inheritance, but 25 years of her life. What happened here? Robert asked, looking at the broken pot with what Elena now recognized as fake concern. My poor ficus. I've had that plant for years. I was dusting and knocked it over, Elena managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady. I'm sorry. I know how much it meant to you. Robert's eyes swept the room and for just a moment, Elena saw something flicker across his face. Fear? Suspicion? But then his practiced smile returned. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. It's just a plant. I'll clean this up. No, let me, Elena said quickly. I made the mess. She knelt down and began gathering the broken pieces, watching Robert from the corner of her eye. He stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, and she realized he was terrified. He was terrified that she had found what he had hidden in that pot, which meant her father had been right about everything. As Elena swept up the last of the soil, her mind was already working. She had been a fool for 25 years, but she wouldn't be a fool anymore. Robert had stolen her father's legacy, her family's future, and her own life. But now she had the evidence to destroy him. She would not confront him. She would not give him a chance to explain or make excuses. She would not fall for his lies again. Instead, she would do exactly what he had done to her. She would plan carefully, gather evidence, and strike when he least expected it. The broken ficus pot had revealed more than hidden objects. It had revealed her husband's true nature and her own strength. Elena Thompson had spent 25 years being the perfect, trusting wife. Now it was time to become something else entirely. As she carried the dustpan to the kitchen, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: power. The power that came from knowing the truth. The power that came from having evidence. And most importantly, the power that came from finally understanding that she didn't have to be a victim anymore. Robert thought he had buried the truth in that pot. Instead, he had planted the seeds of his own destruction. Elena barely slept that night. She lay beside Robert, listening to his steady breathing, wondering how many nights she had shared a bed with a thief. Every time she looked at him, her father's words echoed in her mind. He married you for money. 25 years of marriage reduced to a calculated business transaction. The next morning, after Robert left for work at what she had believed was his consulting firm, Elena drove to First National Bank. The safety deposit box key felt heavy in her palm as she signed the access forms. The bank employee, Mrs. Patterson, had known Elena's family for decades. "I haven't seen you here since your father's funeral," Mrs. Patterson said kindly. "How are you managing?" Elena forced a smile. "Getting by. Robert's been handling most of the business affairs." Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted slightly, but she said nothing as she led Elena to the vault. Box 247 was larger than Elena had expected. When the bank employee left her alone with the box, Elena's hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of documents, photographs, and several more memory cards. Her father had been thorough. There were copies of financial statements showing systematic theft dating back 15 years, money siphoned from Thompson Industries into personal accounts. Bank statements for accounts Elena had never known existed. And photographs of Robert with a woman Elena didn't recognize, taken outside expensive restaurants and hotels. The woman was younger than Elena, probably in her early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes. In one photo, Robert was kissing her passionately. In another, they were looking at what appeared to be real estate listings. The photos were dated just 6 months before her father's death. Elena's chest tightened. While she had been caring for her dying father, Robert had been planning their future with another woman using stolen money. She picked up a folder labeled Victoria Sterling Business Partner. Inside were documents showing that Victoria owned 49% of a consulting company called Sterling and Associates. Robert owned 51%. According to the paperwork, they had started the company 3 years ago with capital that Elena now realized had been stolen from her family's business. There was a letter in Victoria's handwriting addressed to Robert. "Darling, once the old man is gone and you get control of Thompson Industries, we can liquidate everything and disappear to the Cayman Islands like we planned. Elena will never suspect anything. She's too trusting and too stupid to figure it out. By the time she realizes what happened, we'll be long gone with everything." Elena read the letter 3 times, each reading making her angrier. Too trusting and too stupid. She had been both, but she wouldn't be anymore. The final item in the box was a sealed envelope marked, "For Elena's eyes only, emergency plan." Inside was a detailed investigation report compiled by a private detective her father had hired. The report documented not just Robert's theft and affair, but his pattern of targeting wealthy women throughout his life. Before Elena there had been 2 other women. Both had lost their inheritances to Robert before he disappeared from their lives. Elena was not his first victim. She was just his most successful con. The report included current addresses, phone numbers, and financial records for both previous victims. It also contained evidence that Robert had forged Elena's signature on dozens of documents over the years, transferring properties and assets into his name or joint accounts he controlled. As Elena photographed each document with her phone, a plan began forming in her mind. Her father had given her the evidence, but she would have to be smart about how she used it. Robert was clearly planning to leave her once he had stolen everything. The question was how much time she had before he executed his exit strategy. She drove home with copies of everything, leaving the originals in the safety deposit box. Robert's car was still gone, so she had time to examine the memory cards. She inserted the first one into her laptop, and security footage began playing footage from her father's office, showing Robert accessing files and transferring money after hours. The timestamp showed this had been happening for years, even before her father got sick. The second memory card contained recorded phone conversations between Robert and Victoria, discussing their plans to clean out the old man's accounts and disappear once Elena signed over the remaining assets. In one conversation, Robert laughed about how easy it had been to manipulate Elena. "She signs whatever I put in front of her," Robert's voice said through her laptop speakers. "All I have to do is use a few big words and act like it's too complicated for her to understand. She actually thanked me for handling all the boring business stuff." Elena slammed the laptop shut, her face burning with shame and anger. She had thanked him. She had been grateful that he was willing to handle the complex financial matters after her father's death. She had trusted him completely while he robbed her blind. But the shame was quickly replaced by determination. Robert thought he was smart, but he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated her. He saw her as a mark, not a threat. That would be his downfall. Elena spent the rest of the day researching the two women Robert had previously conned. The first, Patricia Williams, had lost her family's restaurant chain to Robert 12 years ago. The second, Michelle Rodriguez, had lost her inheritance from her grandmother's estate 8 years ago. Both women had tried to pursue legal action, but Robert had covered his tracks well and disappeared before they could prove anything. Elena found current contact information for both women. Patricia was now working as a waitress in Nevada. Michelle was struggling to make ends meet as a teacher in Arizona. Robert had destroyed their lives and moved on without a second thought. By the time Robert came home that evening, Elena had made her decision. She would not confront him immediately. She would not give him the chance to destroy evidence or disappear. Instead, she would build an ironclad case against him, gather allies, and strike when he was most vulnerable. "How was your day?" Robert asked as he kissed her cheek, the same kiss he had given her thousands of times before. Now it felt like betrayal itself. "Quiet," Elena replied. "I spent some time looking through Dad's old photos. I miss him." "I know you do," Robert said, his voice full of fake sympathy. "But you have to move forward. He would want that for you." Elena nodded, playing the role of the grieving, dependent wife one more time. But inside she was calculating. Robert thought he had buried her father's legacy along with the truth. He had no idea that he had actually awakened something in Elena that had been sleeping for 25 years, her father's business instincts and her own capacity for strategic thinking. The broken ficus pot had been an accident. Everything that followed would be carefully planned revenge. Elena woke up before dawn, her mind racing with plans. She had spent the past week being the perfect wife, cooking Robert's favorite meals and listening to his lies about work with a smile on her face. But every moment of pretending was building her case and her resolve. She had called in sick to her part-time job at the local library, a job Robert had suggested she take to keep busy after her father's death. Now she understood it was probably to keep her out of the house while he conducted his real business with Victoria. While Robert showered, Elena used his laptop to check his email. She had discovered his password years ago, their wedding anniversary, which now seemed like the cruelest joke of all. His inbox contained dozens of emails from Victoria, and Elena's stomach churned as she read through their casual discussions of her life and her assets. The house appraisal came back at $2.8 million, Victoria had written just 3 days ago. "Once we get Elena to sign the refinancing papers, we can take out a $2 million mortgage and transfer the money to our Cayman account. She'll think she's just consolidating debt." Robert's response made Elena's blood boil. "Perfect. I'll tell her it's to lower our monthly payments. She believes anything I say about finances. We should be able to complete the transfer and disappear within 6 months." Elena quickly forwarded the emails to her own account and deleted them from Robert's sent folder. She was getting better at this espionage game, and it felt good to finally be one step ahead of him. After Robert left for work, Elena drove to the address listed for Sterling and Associates. It was in an upscale business district, and the building directory showed their suite number. Elena sat in her car across the street, watching the entrance. At 10:30 a.m. Victoria Sterling emerged from the building. She was even more striking in person than in the photographs, tall, blonde, and expensively dressed in a way that screamed money. Elena's money, she realized with bitter irony. Victoria climbed into a Mercedes convertible and drove away, probably heading to spend more of the Thompson family fortune. Elena waited another hour before approaching the building. She took the elevator to the 5th floor and found Sterling and Associates. Through the glass doors she could see a receptionist and several well-appointed offices. This was no small operation. Robert and Victoria had built a legitimate-looking business using stolen funds. She didn't go inside. Instead, she took photos of the building, the business directory, and the parking garage where she had seen Victoria's Mercedes. Later, she would research the business registration and find out exactly how much of her father's money had gone into creating Robert's fake consulting empire. Elena's next stop was the law office of Harrison Beck, her father's longtime attorney. Mr. Beck was in his 70s now, but his mind was still sharp. Elena had called ahead, saying she needed to review some documents from her father's estate. "Elena, it's wonderful to see you," Mr. Beck said warmly as she entered his office. "Though I have to say you look troubled. Is everything all right?" Elena took a deep breath. It was time to start trusting someone, and her father had trusted Harrison Beck for 30 years. Mr. Beck, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did my father ever express any concerns about Robert? Mr. Beck's expression grew serious. He closed his office door and sat back down behind his desk. Your father came to see me about 2 months before he died. He was very worried about some irregularities he had discovered in the business accounts. He suspected Robert was stealing, but he didn't have definitive proof. Why didn't you tell me this after Dad died? Your father made me promise not to interfere unless you came to me first. He said you needed to discover the truth on your own or you would never believe it. He was protecting you, Elena, but he was also testing you. He knew that if Robert was truly stealing, the evidence would eventually surface. Elena pulled out copies of the documents from the safety deposit box. It surfaced all right. Mr. Beck spent the next hour reviewing the evidence, his expression growing darker with each document. This is extensive fraud, Elena. Identity theft, forgery, embezzlement. Robert could face decades in prison. But we need to be very careful about how we proceed. If he suspects he could destroy evidence or disappear. He's already planning to disappear, Elena said, showing him the emails about the Cayman Islands. I think I have maybe 6 months before he tries to take everything and run. Then we need to move quickly but carefully. I'm going to recommend we bring in a forensic accountant and a private investigator. We also need to notify the FBI. This level of financial fraud crosses state lines and involves offshore accounts. Elena felt a mix of terror and relief. Making it official meant there would be no going back, no pretending this was all a misunderstanding. But it also meant she would finally have professional help in taking down the man who had stolen her life. There's something else, Elena said. Robert did this to 2 other women before me. I have their contact information. Mr. Beck's eyes widened. That makes this a pattern of criminal behavior. It strengthens the case considerably. Elena, I have to ask, are you prepared for what this means? This will destroy your marriage, expose you to public scrutiny, and potentially put you in danger if Robert realizes what you're doing. My marriage was destroyed 25 years ago, Elena said firmly. I just didn't know it. As for the rest, I'd rather face danger than continue living a lie. That afternoon, Elena made 2 of the hardest phone calls of her life. She contacted Patricia Williams and Michelle Rodriguez, the women Robert had previously conned. Both conversations were difficult, but both women immediately agreed to cooperate with any investigation. I've been waiting 8 years for someone to take him down, Michelle said through tears. He destroyed my family's legacy and I could never prove it. Thank you for believing me. Patricia was even more direct. I'll testify, I'll provide documents, I'll do whatever it takes. That man is a predator and he needs to be stopped. By the end of the week, Elena had assembled a team. Harrison Beck was coordinating the legal strategy. A forensic accountant named Dr. Sarah Chen was analyzing the financial evidence. A private investigator named Tony Rodriguez was conducting surveillance on Robert and Victoria. And Elena was learning skills she never thought she would need: how to lie convincingly, how to gather evidence without arousing suspicion, and how to plan the systematic destruction of someone's life. The irony wasn't lost on her. Robert had spent years teaching her these skills without realizing it. Every lie he told, every manipulation he used, every time he made her feel stupid or naive, he had been training her to become his perfect opponent. Elena looked at herself in the mirror that night and barely recognized the woman staring back. The trusting, dependent wife was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and absolutely determined to make Robert pay for every year he had stolen from her. She had spent 25 years being the victim in Robert's con game. Now it was time to become the hunter. 3 weeks had passed since Elena discovered the truth, and she was getting better at living a double life. By day she played the role of the loving, oblivious wife. By night, she worked with her growing team to build the case that would destroy Robert's carefully constructed world. The forensic accountant, Dr. Chin, had traced the stolen money through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. The total amount was staggering: over $15 million stolen from Thompson Industries over the years, plus another $8 million in personal assets that Robert had transferred out of Elena's name through forged documents. He's been planning this for decades, Dr. Chin explained during their meeting at Harrison Beck's office. The theft started small, a few thousand here and there, but escalated dramatically after your father's death. He's been systematically liquidating everything your family built. The private investigator, Tony Rodriguez, had been following Robert and Victoria for 2 weeks. His surveillance photos told a story of lavish spending and detailed planning. Robert and Victoria met daily at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels and real estate offices. They were clearly preparing for their escape. "They've been house hunting in the Cayman Islands," Tony reported. "I tracked their flight reservations and real estate appointments. They're planning to purchase a beachfront property next month using funds from what appears to be your family accounts." Elena studied the photos of Robert and Victoria laughing together over champagne, probably celebrating their successful theft of her life's work. "How much time do we have?" "Based on their conversations and activities, I'd estimate 6 to 8 weeks before they make their move," Tony said. "Robert's been gradually transferring larger amounts recently. It looks like he's accelerating his timeline." Harrison Beck leaned forward in his chair. "We need to move faster than they do. I've been working with federal prosecutors, and they're ready to file charges as soon as we give them the signal. But Elena, once we start this process, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready?" Elena thought about the woman she had been a month ago, trusting, naive, completely dependent on Robert's lies. That woman would have begged Robert to explain, would have given him chances to make things right, would have convinced herself that love could overcome betrayal. But that woman was gone. "I'm ready," Elena said firmly. "What do I need to do?" The plan they developed was complex but elegant. Elena would continue her normal routine while wearing a wire to record Robert's admissions of guilt. They would simultaneously freeze his accounts, serve search warrants on Sterling and Associates, and arrest both Robert and Victoria before they could flee the country. But first, Elena needed to make one more contact. Someone who could help them understand Robert's psychology and predict his reactions. Dr. Amanda Foster was a forensic psychologist who specialized in white-collar criminals. She had worked on several high-profile fraud cases and understood the mindset of men like Robert. "Narcissistic sociopaths like your husband are predictable in some ways," Dr. Foster explained during their consultation. "They believe they're smarter than everyone around them, which makes them careless. They also have tremendous egos. If confronted with evidence of their crimes, they often can't resist bragging about how clever they've been. So if I confront him, he might confess? If you do it right, yes. But it's dangerous, Elena. Men like Robert can become violent when cornered, especially if they feel their carefully constructed image is being threatened." Elena considered this. She had never seen Robert be physically violent, but then again she had never threatened his freedom before. What if I had backup nearby? That would be safer. But remember, the goal is to get him to incriminate himself on tape. You need to stay calm, act like you're still the naive wife who just stumbled onto something, and let his ego do the rest. Elena spent the next week practicing her approach with the team. They role-played different scenarios, with Tony playing Robert and trying to throw Elena off her game. It was harder than she expected. After 25 years of marriage, she knew exactly which buttons Robert would push to make her doubt herself. "He's going to tell you that you're overreacting," Harrison Beck warned. "He's going to say you're being paranoid and emotional. He's going to try to make you feel guilty for not trusting him. And then he's going to try to flip the script," Dr. Foster added. "He'll claim he was protecting you, that everything he did was for your own good. Narcissists always cast themselves as the hero, even when they're caught red-handed." Elena practiced staying calm while Tony hurled Robert's favorite insults at her. She practiced asking probing questions without sounding suspicious. Most importantly, she practiced remembering that nothing Robert said could be trusted anymore. His words were just tools he used to manipulate people. Meanwhile, Patricia Williams and Michelle Rodriguez had arrived in town. Both women had agreed to be present when Robert was arrested, to look him in the eye when his crimes were finally exposed. Elena met with them at Harrison Beck's office, and their shared pain created an instant bond. "He told me I was too emotional to understand business," Patricia said, her voice shaking with old anger. "While he was stealing my family's restaurant chain, he convinced me that I should be grateful he was handling the complicated financial stuff." "Same here," Michelle agreed. "He made me feel stupid every time I asked questions about my grandmother's estate. He said I should trust him to make the grown-up decisions." Elena recognized the pattern immediately. "He did the same thing to me. Made me feel like I was lucky to have such a smart husband to handle all the difficult things." "We were all smart women before we met him," Patricia said firmly. "He didn't steal our money because we were stupid. He stole it because he's a predator who targets successful women and systematically destroys their confidence." For the first time since discovering the truth, Elena felt something other than anger or determination. She felt solidarity. She wasn't alone in this, and she wasn't the first woman to fall for Robert's lies. Most importantly, she wouldn't be the last woman to fight back. The three women spent hours sharing stories, comparing Robert's methods and planning their confrontation. They had all been isolated by Robert's manipulations, made to feel like they were the problem. Now they were a team and they were dangerous. "When this is over," Elena said as their meeting concluded, "I want to start a foundation to help other women in similar situations. We can turn our experience into something that protects people." "I'm in," Patricia said immediately. "Me too," Michelle agreed. "Let's make sure Robert's victims become his downfall." Elena drove home that night feeling stronger than she had in weeks. She was no longer just seeking revenge, she was leading a movement. Robert had created 3 enemies when he thought he was creating 3 victims. Now those enemies were about to teach him that underestimating women was the biggest mistake of his criminal career. Tomorrow she would confront the man who had stolen 25 years of her life. But tonight, she was planning the future that she would build from the ashes of his lies. Elena had become an expert at managing her double life. During breakfast, she listened to Robert complain about his difficult clients, while knowing he was actually discussing money laundering with Victoria. When he kissed her goodbye each morning, she smiled and told him to have a good day while secretly hoping it would be one of his last as a free man. The wire she wore was so small that even she sometimes forgot about it. Tony Rodriguez had chosen the latest technology, a device that looked like a small piece of jewelry but could record hours of conversation with perfect clarity. Elena had gotten comfortable wearing it, though her heart still raced every time Robert looked at her suspiciously. Dr. Chin had made a breakthrough in tracing the digital evidence. She had recovered deleted files from Robert's personal computer, files he thought were gone forever but which told the complete story of his criminal enterprise. "Look at this," Dr. Chin said, showing Elena a spreadsheet on her laptop screen. "This is Robert's personal tracking system. He's been documenting every theft, every forged signature, every transfer to offshore accounts. He kept meticulous records." Elena stared at the screen in disbelief. He documented his own crimes? "Criminals often do this," Harrison Beck explained. "They're proud of their work and they want to keep track of their success." Robert's ego led him to create the perfect evidence against himself. The spreadsheet was damning. It showed not just the Thompson Industries theft, but similar operations against Patricia and Michelle years earlier. Robert had a system: identify wealthy women with family money, marry or partner with them, gain access to their finances, then systematically steal everything while maintaining the illusion of a loving relationship. There were even notes about Elena's personality and vulnerabilities: very trusting, defers to authority, easily intimidated by financial complexity. Father issues make her seek approval from older men. Perfect mark. Elena read those words 3 times, each reading making her angrier. Robert hadn't just stolen her money, he had studied her like a scientist studying a lab rat, identifying her weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. "There's more," Dr. Chin continued, clicking to another file. "Robert's been planning his exit strategy for over a year. He has detailed plans for disappearing, complete with new identities and escape routes." The file was titled Project Freedom, and contained everything Robert and Victoria would need to vanish completely. New passports under assumed names. Safe deposit boxes in 3 different countries. A yacht purchase in the Mediterranean. Even plastic surgery consultations to change their appearances. "He's thought of everything," Elena murmured. "Not quite everything," Tony Rodriguez said with a grim smile. "He didn't plan on you finding his secret files. And he definitely didn't plan on us." Elena studied Robert's escape plan with a mixture of horror and admiration. It was thorough, clever, and would have worked perfectly if she had remained the trusting wife he thought he married. Robert really was intelligent, he was just too arrogant to imagine that his victim might become his hunter. "When is he planning to execute this?" Elena asked. Dr. Chin pointed to a timeline at the bottom of the document. "According to this, he's planning to disappear in exactly 3 weeks. The final transfer is scheduled for next Friday. He's going to clean out the last of your accounts and wire the money to the Cayman Islands. Then he and Victoria will fly to Paris, connect to their yacht, and sail into the sunset with your family's entire fortune." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. 3 weeks. If she hadn't broken that ficus pot, Robert would have succeeded completely. She would have woken up one morning to find her husband gone, her accounts empty, and her life destroyed with no way to prove what had happened. "We need to move faster," Elena said. "I want to confront him this weekend." Harrison Beck looked concerned. "Are you sure you're ready? We could wait until we have even more evidence." "We have enough evidence to convict him 10 times over," Elena replied. And every day we wait is another day he could discover what we're doing and run. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes I know everything. Dr. Foster had prepared Elena for this moment. They had practiced the confrontation dozens of times, with Elena learning to stay calm while revealing devastating information. The key was to let Robert's ego trap him, to make him think he was still smarter than her even as she revealed his crimes. Remember, Dr. Foster had coached her, men like Robert can't resist explaining how clever they've been. If you approach this right, he'll confess to everything while trying to prove how superior he is. Elena spent the weekend preparing. She memorized key questions that would prompt Robert to incriminate himself. She practiced controlling her emotions so she could stay focused on gathering evidence rather than expressing her pain. Most importantly, she reminded herself that the man she had loved for 25 years had never actually existed. He was just a character Robert played to steal her life. On Sunday evening, Robert was in his home office, probably making final preparations for his escape. Elena knocked on the door and entered with a cup of coffee for him, a gesture he would interpret as normal wifely attention. "Thank you, sweetheart," Robert said without looking up from his computer. "I'm just finishing up some client work." Elena set the coffee down and glanced at his screen. She could see spreadsheets that looked similar to the ones Dr. Chen had shown her. "Looks complicated," she said casually. "It is," Robert replied with his usual condescending tone. "Don't worry about it. Just boring financial stuff." Elena took a deep breath. The wire was recording everything. Tony Rodriguez was parked outside with backup equipment. Harrison Beck was on standby with federal agents. It was time to spring the trap that would end Robert's criminal career. "Actually," Elena said, sitting down across from his desk, "I've been learning a lot about financial stuff lately. Dad's safety deposit box had some interesting documents in it." Robert's fingers froze over his keyboard. For just a moment his mask slipped, and Elena saw naked fear in his eyes. Then he recovered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, what kind of documents?" Elena pulled out copies of the bank statements showing Robert's theft. She placed them on his desk, watching his face carefully. "The kind that show where Thompson Industries' money has been going for the past 15 years. Robert stared at the documents, his mind clearly racing. Elena could almost see him calculating his options: deny everything, claim it was a misunderstanding, blame someone else, or run. Instead, he surprised her by laughing. "Well," Robert said, leaning back in his chair with a smile that was genuinely amused, "I wondered when you'd finally figure it out. I have to admit, Elena, you're much smarter than I gave you credit for." The casual admission hit Elena like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain calm. Dr. Foster had been right. Robert's ego was so massive that he couldn't resist boasting about his crimes. "So you admit you've been stealing from my father's company?" Elena asked, keeping her voice steady. Robert laughed again, a sound that now made Elena's skin crawl. "Stealing is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as redistributing assets to someone who could manage them properly. Your father was a decent man, Elena, but he was old-fashioned. He didn't understand modern financial opportunities." "Modern financial opportunities?" Elena repeated. "Is that what you call $15 million in theft?" $15 million? Robert's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "My dear, you're thinking too small. It's closer to 23 million when you include the personal assets I've moved to safer investments. Your father left you quite wealthy, but wealth is wasted on people who don't know how to use it." Elena felt sick, but she pushed forward. "And Victoria Sterling? Is she part of these safer investments?" Robert's smile widened. "Victoria is a brilliant business partner. Much more sophisticated than..." He gestured vaguely at Elena. "Well, then the kind of woman who spends her days working at a library and arranging flowers." "Business partner?" Elena said. "Is that what you call the woman you're planning to run away with to the Cayman Islands?" For the first time, Robert looked genuinely surprised. "How did you... I see. You've been quite busy, haven't you? Tell me, Elena, how long have you known?" "Long enough to understand that our entire marriage has been a lie." Robert stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back like a professor giving a lecture. "Not a lie exactly. More like a business arrangement that happened to include emotional companionship. You got 25 years of financial security and social status. I got access to your family's assets. It was mutually beneficial." "Mutually beneficial," Elena repeated, her voice dripping with disgust. "You stole everything my father built, everything my family worked for generations to create, and you call it mutually beneficial?" Your father built a small-town business with limited growth potential, Robert said dismissively. I've turned those assets into a sophisticated international portfolio. In a way, I've honored his legacy by making his money work harder than he ever could have imagined. Elena realized that Robert actually believed what he was saying. In his twisted mind, he was the hero of this story, the brilliant financial wizard who had rescued Elena's family money from mediocrity. What about Patricia Williams and Michelle Rodriguez? Elena asked. Were those business arrangements too? Robert's expression darkened slightly. How do you know those names? I know a lot of things, Robert. I know you've done this before. I know you have a pattern of targeting women with inheritances, gaining their trust, stealing their money, and disappearing. Those were learning experiences, Robert admitted with a shrug. I wasn't as refined in my approach back then. Patricia was too suspicious, and Michelle was too involved in the day-to-day business operations. You were perfect, Elena. Trusting, easily overwhelmed by financial complexity, and desperate for a strong man to take care of you after your father died. Elena's hands clenched into fists under the table. You studied me. You planned this from the beginning. Of course I did, Robert said proudly. Do you think I married you for love? Elena, please. You were a means to an end, nothing more. A very pleasant means. I'll admit you've been an excellent wife and hostess. But ultimately, you were just the key to your father's fortune. Elena stood up slowly, her entire body shaking with rage. But she forced her voice to remain calm. And now you're planning to disappear with Victoria and leave me with nothing. Not nothing, Robert said magnanimously. I'm leaving you the house, well, the mortgage payments anyway. And you have your job at the library. You'll be fine. You might even be happier without the burden of managing all that money. Elena stared at this man she had shared a bed with for 25 years, this stranger who had systematically destroyed her life while pretending to love her. You're proud of this, aren't you? You're actually proud of what you've done. I'm proud of my success, yes, Robert said. It took careful planning, perfect execution, and years of patience. Not many people could have pulled off something this sophisticated. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out the wire Tony had given her. She set it on Robert's desk and his face went white as he realized what it was. You recorded all of that, he whispered. Every word, Elena confirmed. Including your confession to $23 million in theft, your admission that our marriage was a fraud, and your detailed explanation of how you've been running this con for years. Robert lunged for the recording device, but Elena was faster. She grabbed it and stepped back toward the door. It's too late, Robert. I've already given copies to the FBI. This was just to give you a chance to hear yourself admit what kind of monster you really are. Robert's carefully controlled mask finally cracked completely. His face twisted with rage, and for a moment Elena saw the predator that had been hiding behind 25 years of fake smiles and gentle touches. You stupid little bitch, he snarled. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you think you can outsmart me? I've been planning this for years. I have contingencies you can't even imagine. I'm sure you do, Elena said calmly. But you made one crucial mistake, Robert. You assumed I would stay stupid forever. She turned toward the door, but Robert's voice stopped her. This isn't over, Elena. You think you've won, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I will destroy you for this. Elena turned back to face him one last time. No, Robert. You already tried to destroy me and you failed. Now it's my turn. She left him standing in his office, probably frantically trying to figure out how to salvage his escape plan. But it was already too late. In less than 12 hours, federal agents would be at his door with arrest warrants. His accounts would be frozen, his assets seized, and his carefully constructed world would come crashing down around him. Elena walked out of that house for the last time, knowing she would never return. The woman who had lived there for 25 years was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, someone who could never again be fooled by a charming smile and false promises. As she drove away, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, complete and total freedom. Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat in her hotel room, replaying the recording of Robert's confession over and over. Each time she heard his voice describing their marriage as a business arrangement, she felt a fresh wave of anger and determination. Harrison Beck had arranged for her to stay at a secure location while the federal agents prepared their case. The recording from the confrontation was devastating evidence, but they wanted to make sure Robert couldn't flee or destroy additional evidence before the arrests. At 6 a.m. Elena's phone rang. It was Tony Rodriguez. Robert's making his move, Tony reported. He left the house 20 minutes ago with 2 suitcases. He's driving toward the airport. Elena's heart jumped. Are the agents ready? They're in position. Don't worry, he's not getting away. Elena quickly dressed and drove to the FBI field office, where she was met by Agent Sarah Mitchell, the lead investigator on the case. Agent Mitchell was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who specialized in white-collar crime. Your recording last night was exactly what we needed, Agent Mitchell said as she led Elena to an observation room. Robert's confession tied together all the financial evidence we've been gathering. We have enough to arrest him and Victoria on multiple federal charges. Through a one-way window, Elena could see a room full of agents coordinating the arrests. Computer screens showed surveillance footage from the airport, where Robert was apparently trying to board a private jet. He had a plane waiting, Agent Mitchell explained. Our investigation revealed he purchased it 6 months ago using stolen funds. He and Victoria were planning to fly to Canada, then connect to their yacht in the Mediterranean. Elena watched the screens as federal agents surrounded Robert at the airport. Even from a distance, she could see his shock and anger as he was placed in handcuffs. 25 years of planning, and his freedom ended in a matter of seconds. What about Victoria? Elena asked. She's being arrested at Sterling and Associates as we speak. We also have teams executing search warrants at their offices, their homes and several storage units they've been renting. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction. Robert and Victoria had thought they were so clever, so sophisticated in their criminal enterprise. But they had underestimated the power of federal law enforcement when given solid evidence. Dr. Chin arrived an hour later with preliminary results from the search warrants. You're not going to believe what we found, she said, spreading documents across the conference table. Robert kept physical copies of everything: bank statements, forged documents, even photographs documenting his previous cons. Elena looked through the photographs and felt sick. There were pictures of Robert with Patricia Williams and Michelle Rodriguez, taken during the time he was stealing from them. He had documented his crimes like trophies. There's more, Dr. Chin continued. We found evidence of at least 3 other victims we didn't know about. Robert's been running this con for over 20 years. You weren't his 3rd victim, Elena, you were his 6th. Elena sank into a chair. 6 women. 6 lives destroyed by Robert's systematic theft and manipulation. How many other families had lost their inheritances to his greed? We're contacting all the victims, Agent Mitchell assured her. And we're going to make sure they're included in the restitution process. Robert and Victoria's assets will be seized and distributed back to the people they stole from. Elena spent the next several hours giving detailed statements to federal investigators. She provided them with all the evidence her father had hidden, explained Robert's methods of manipulation, and described his plans for disappearing with the stolen money. By afternoon, the story was breaking on local news. Elena watched from the FBI office as reporters gathered outside her house, outside Sterling and Associates, and outside the federal courthouse where Robert and Victoria were being processed. Wife discovers husband's 25-year con game, read one headline. Local woman exposes multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, read another. Elena's phone was buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, but she ignored them all. She wasn't ready to face the media yet. She was still processing the reality that her entire adult life had been built on lies. Patricia Williams and Michelle Rodriguez arrived that evening, both having flown in to witness Robert's arrest. The 3 women met in Harrison Beck's office to discuss their next steps. I can't believe it's finally over, Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. I've been waiting 12 years for justice. It's not completely over yet, Michelle pointed out. We still have to go through the trial process. Robert's going to hire expensive lawyers and try to minimize his sentence. Elena had been thinking about this. He's going to claim everything was legal, that we gave him permission to manage our money. He's going to try to make us look like willing participants in our own victimization. Harrison Beck nodded grimly. That's exactly what his defense will be. Robert's lawyers will argue that these were legitimate business relationships that went sour, not criminal fraud. Then we need to be prepared, Elena said firmly. We need to tell our stories clearly and make sure the jury understands that we were victims, not partners. Dr. Foster had warned Elena about this phase of the process. The legal system can be traumatic for fraud victims, she had explained. Defense lawyers will try to make you feel stupid for trusting the person who stole from you. They'll suggest that you should have known better, that you were somehow complicit in your own victimization. Elena was determined not to let Robert's lawyers destroy her credibility the way Robert himself had destroyed her life. She spent hours preparing her testimony, practicing with prosecutors to make sure she could tell her story clearly and convincingly. The media attention was intense but largely sympathetic. Elena's story resonated with people across the country, the trusting wife who discovered her husband's betrayal and fought back. She received hundreds of letters from other women who had experienced similar situations. "I wish I had been as brave as you," wrote one woman from Texas. "My ex-husband stole my inheritance too, but I was too embarrassed to fight back." "Thank you for showing that we don't have to be victims forever," wrote another from California. "Your courage gives me hope." Elena realized that her personal tragedy had become something larger, a symbol of women's ability to fight back against financial abuse and fraud. The broken ficus pot that had revealed Robert's crimes had also revealed her own strength. 2 weeks after Robert's arrest, Elena made her first public statement. She held a press conference at Harrison Beck's office, flanked by Patricia and Michelle. "Robert Thompson stole more than money from us," Elena said, reading from prepared remarks. "He stole years of our lives, our trust in other people, and our confidence in our own judgment. But he made one crucial mistake: he underestimated our ability to fight back." Elena looked directly into the cameras. "If you're in an abusive relationship, if someone is controlling your finances or making you feel stupid about money, please get help. There are people who will believe you and support you. You don't have to face this alone." The press conference was carried by national news networks. Elena's phone started ringing immediately with calls from book publishers, movie producers, and women's advocacy groups. Everyone wanted to tell her story. But Elena wasn't interested in fame or fortune. She was interested in justice and in making sure Robert could never hurt anyone else again. The trial was still months away, but Elena felt confident. She had the evidence, she had the testimony of multiple victims, and she had something Robert had never counted on: she had found her voice. After 25 years of silence, Elena Thompson was finally ready to speak her truth. 3 months had passed since Robert's arrest, and Elena was living a life she never could have imagined. She had moved into a downtown apartment, started working with a therapist to process 25 years of psychological manipulation, and was preparing for what prosecutors called the trial of the decade. Robert had been denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with access to hidden assets in multiple countries. He sat in federal detention, probably still believing he could talk his way out of the charges. Elena knew him well enough to understand that he would never accept responsibility for his crimes. In his mind, he was still the victim of an ungrateful wife's betrayal. Victoria Sterling had taken a different approach. Her lawyers had immediately started negotiating a plea deal, offering to testify against Robert in exchange for a reduced sentence. Elena wasn't surprised. Victoria was smart enough to realize that Robert would throw her under the bus if it served his interests. "Victoria's cooperation has been invaluable," Agent Mitchell explained during one of their preparation meetings. "She's provided details about Robert's methods that we never could have discovered otherwise. She's confirmed that you were always intended to be a temporary acquisition. Robert was planning to divorce you and disappear once he had liquidated all your assets." Elena absorbed this information with grim satisfaction. Every detail that emerged painted Robert as an even more calculating predator than she had imagined. The forensic accounting had revealed the full scope of Robert's criminal enterprise. Over 23 years, he had stolen nearly $40 million from 6 different women. He had used the money to fund an elaborate lifestyle while systematically destroying his victims' financial security. "The pattern is identical in every case," Dr. Chin reported. "Robert identifies wealthy women who have recently inherited money or gone through emotional trauma. He presents himself as a sophisticated older man who can provide stability and financial guidance. Once he gains access to their assets, he begins the systematic theft while convincing them they're lucky to have such a competent partner." Elena had spent hours studying Robert's previous crimes, understanding how she fit into his larger pattern of predation. She wasn't special, she was just the most successful mark in a decades-long career of financial fraud. But the investigation had also revealed something Robert hadn't counted on: his victims were fighters. Patricia Williams had never stopped investigating Robert's theft of her family restaurant chain. She had collected evidence for 12 years, hoping someday to find a way to hold him accountable. Michelle Rodriguez had done the same thing after losing her grandmother's estate. She had tracked Robert's movements, documented his new identity, and built a file of evidence that authorities were now using to prosecute him. "All of Robert's victims have been collecting evidence for years," Harrison Beck explained. "They never gave up hope for justice. When you came forward, Elena, you gave them the platform they needed to finally tell their stories." Elena had also discovered that her father's investigation had been more extensive than she originally realized. The private detective he hired had been tracking Robert for months before her father's death, building a comprehensive case that included surveillance footage, financial records, and recorded conversations. "Your father knew he was dying," the detective, Frank Morrison, explained when Elena met with him. "He wanted to make sure you had everything you needed to protect yourself. He loved you too much to let Robert destroy the family legacy." Elena cried when she heard this. Her father had been protecting her even from his deathbed, creating the tools she would need to fight back against the man who had stolen her life. The prosecution team was led by Assistant U.S. Attorney David Park, a prosecutor who specialized in complex fraud cases. He was confident they had enough evidence to convict Robert on multiple federal charges. "Robert's confession to you was the key," Park explained. "Combined with the financial evidence, Victoria's testimony, and the testimony of his other victims, we have an overwhelming case. Robert is looking at potentially 30 to 40 years in federal prison." Elena felt no satisfaction in the prospect of Robert's imprisonment. She wasn't motivated by revenge anymore. She was motivated by the need to protect other women from experiencing what she had endured. The trial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. Elena was prepared to testify, but she was also prepared for Robert's lawyers to attack her credibility and character. They would argue that she was a scorned wife seeking revenge, that she had willingly participated in Robert's financial decisions, and that she was too sophisticated to have been truly deceived. "They're going to make you look like either a co-conspirator or a fool," Park warned her. "Either you knew what Robert was doing and were complicit, or you were too stupid to deserve sympathy. That's their strategy." Elena was ready for this attack. She had spent months working with Dr. Foster to understand how psychological manipulation worked, how intelligent people could be systematically deceived by skilled predators. "Robert didn't succeed because his victims were stupid," Dr. Foster had explained. "He succeeded because he was a skilled manipulator who understood how to exploit trust, grief, and social conditioning. His victims were successful, intelligent women. That's exactly why he targeted them." Elena had also been working with a media consultant to prepare for the inevitable publicity surrounding the trial. Her story had captured national attention, and she was being hailed as a hero for fighting back against financial fraud. But Elena didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a survivor who had been lucky enough to discover the truth before it was too late. The week before the trial began, Elena met with all of Robert's victims at Harrison Beck's office. 6 women, ranging in age from 32 to 68, all united by their experience with the same predator. "I want you all to know," Elena said, addressing the group, "that this trial isn't just about getting justice for what Robert did to us. It's about sending a message to other financial predators that they can't destroy women's lives without consequences. And it's about showing other victims that they don't have to stay silent," Patricia added. "Elena's courage gave all of us permission to speak our truth." Elena looked around the room at these strong, intelligent women who had been systematically victimized by the man she had shared a bed with for 25 years. They represented decades of stolen dreams, destroyed families, and shattered trust. But they also represented something Robert had never counted on: the power of survivors who refused to stay silent. "Tomorrow we start taking back our lives," Elena said. "Robert thought he could steal our money and disappear into the sunset. Instead, he's about to discover that his victims have become his judges." Elena went to bed that night feeling more prepared than she had ever felt for anything in her life. She had evidence, she had allies, and she had something Robert could never understand: the moral authority that came from fighting for justice rather than personal gain. The broken ficus pot had revealed Robert's crimes. Now the courtroom would reveal the true cost of his betrayal and the strength of the women he had tried to destroy. The federal courthouse was packed with reporters, victims' advocates, and curious onlookers as United States versus Robert Thompson began. Elena sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, flanked by Patricia Williams and Michelle Rodriguez. She had spent months preparing for this moment, but seeing Robert in person again still sent a chill through her body. He looked older than his 52 years, his silver hair now showing gray roots, his expensive suits replaced by an orange prison jumpsuit. But his eyes still held that calculating intelligence that had fooled Elena for 25 years. Even in shackles, Robert carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he was smarter than everyone around him. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Park opened with a devastating statement that laid out the scope of Robert's crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next 2 weeks you will hear about one of the most systematic and cruel fraud schemes in modern history. The defendant, Robert Thompson, spent over 20 years targeting successful women, gaining their trust, stealing their inheritances, and destroying their lives. This case is about predatory criminal behavior disguised as love and marriage. Robert's defense attorney, Marcus Sterling, no relation to Victoria, presented a completely different narrative. My client is not a criminal mastermind, Sterling argued. He is a successful businessman who made some poor personal choices. The prosecution wants you to believe that loving, consensual relationships between adults somehow constitute federal crimes. They want to criminalize marriage itself. Elena felt sick listening to Robert's lawyer twist the truth. But she reminded herself that she had expected this strategy: denial, minimization, and victim blaming. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Dr. Chin testified about the forensic accounting, showing how Robert had systematically stolen money from each victim through forged documents and unauthorized transfers. Agent Mitchell described the investigation that had uncovered Robert's escape plan and hidden assets. But the most powerful testimony came from Robert's victims themselves. Patricia Williams took the stand first, describing how Robert had courted her after her parents died in a car accident, how he had convinced her to trust him with her family's restaurant business, and how he had systematically liquidated her assets while telling her the business was failing. He made me feel stupid every time I asked questions, Patricia testified, her voice strong despite her tears. He would use complicated financial terms and then pat me on the head like I was a child who couldn't understand grown-up business. I trusted him completely while he was stealing everything my family had worked for generations to build. Michelle Rodriguez testified about her grandmother's estate, how Robert had convinced her that the inheritance needed to be professionally managed, and how he had moved the money into accounts he controlled before disappearing. I was 26 years old and grieving my grandmother, Michelle said. Robert seemed so sophisticated, so knowledgeable about finance. He made me believe I was lucky to have someone willing to help me handle such complex matters. I never imagined that help was actually theft. Elena watched the jury's faces as each victim told her story. She could see their growing understanding that Robert was not a businessman who had made mistakes. He was a predator who had systematically targeted vulnerable women. When Elena's turn came to testify, she felt calmer than she had expected. She had practiced her testimony dozens of times, but more importantly, she had lived with the truth long enough to tell it clearly and convincingly. Robert didn't just steal my money, Elena testified. He stole 25 years of my life. He made me believe I was loved while he was actually studying me like a scientist studies a lab rat, identifying my weaknesses and exploiting them for financial gain. Elena described the broken ficus pot, the evidence she had found, and the systematic way Robert had isolated her from her family's business while stealing her inheritance. The worst part wasn't the money, Elena continued. The worst part was realizing that the man I had loved and trusted for 25 years had never seen me as a human being. I was just a means to an end, a key to unlock my father's fortune. Robert's defense attorney tried to shake Elena's testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that she had willingly signed documents transferring assets to Robert and that she was now claiming fraud out of anger over his affair with Victoria. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Thompson, that you signed dozens of financial documents over the years?" Sterling asked. "Yes, I did," Elena replied calmly. "Because my husband told me they were routine tax documents or refinancing papers. He deliberately used complex language and rushed me through the signings, always assuring me that I didn't need to read the fine print because he was handling everything. But you're an intelligent woman with a college education. Surely you understood what you were signing?" Elena had prepared for this question. "Mr. Sterling, have you ever been in love? Have you ever trusted someone completely?" Robert spent 25 years training me to defer to his judgment on financial matters. He made me feel stupid every time I asked questions, so I eventually stopped asking. That's not legal consent, that's psychological manipulation. The courtroom was silent as Elena continued. Robert didn't succeed because I was stupid. He succeeded because he was a skilled predator who understood how to exploit trust and love for criminal purposes. Elena could see the jury nodding at her explanation. They understood that intelligence didn't protect someone from systematic manipulation by a skilled con artist. Victoria Sterling's testimony was devastating to Robert's defense. Speaking from a plea agreement that would give her a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation, Victoria described in detail how she and Robert had planned to steal Elena's remaining assets and disappear to the Cayman Islands. Robert called Elena his golden goose, Victoria testified. He said she was perfectly trained to sign whatever he put in front of her without asking questions. He was proud of how completely he had her under control. Victoria also revealed that Robert had been planning to divorce Elena once he had liquidated all her assets. He said there was no point in maintaining the marriage once the money was gone. He was going to file for divorce, claim Elena was mentally unstable, and disappear while she was dealing with the legal proceedings. Elena listened to Victoria's testimony with a mixture of anger and sadness. This woman had helped Robert plan the destruction of Elena's life while probably believing she was Robert's true love. Now Victoria was learning the same lesson Elena had learned, that Robert was incapable of genuine love or loyalty. The most damaging evidence came when prosecutors played the recording of Elena confronting Robert in his home office. The jury heard Robert's own voice confessing to theft, bragging about his manipulation of Elena, and expressing pride in his criminal success. "Your father built a small-town business with limited growth potential," Robert's voice said through the courtroom speakers. "I've turned those assets into a sophisticated international portfolio." Elena watched the jury's faces as they heard Robert describe their marriage as a business arrangement, and explain how he had studied Elena's psychological vulnerabilities to exploit them more effectively. When the recording finished, the courtroom was completely silent. Even Robert's defense attorney looked shaken by hearing his client's casual admission of guilt. Robert chose not to testify in his own defense, probably on the advice of his lawyers who knew he would only incriminate himself further. But his silence spoke volumes. He had no explanation for his recorded confession, no justification for his systematic theft, and no defense against the overwhelming evidence of his crimes. In his closing argument, Prosecutor Park summarized the case with devastating clarity. "Robert Thompson is not a businessman who made mistakes. He is a career criminal who spent over 20 years targeting successful women, gaining their trust through fake love and marriage, and then systematically stealing everything they owned. He is a predator who destroyed 6 families and showed no remorse for his crimes." Robert's defense attorney made a last desperate attempt to portray his client as a flawed but not criminal man who had made poor choices and complicated relationships. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury had heard Robert's own words confessing to his crimes. Elena sat through the closing arguments feeling a strange sense of peace. Regardless of the verdict, she had told her truth. She had faced the man who had stolen her life and refused to be intimidated by him. She had transformed from victim to survivor to warrior, and no jury decision could take that transformation away from her. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Elena looked at Robert one last time. He was staring at her with a mixture of hatred and disbelief, probably still unable to comprehend how his perfectly trained victim had become his destroyer. Elena stared back unflinchingly. The frightened, dependent woman Robert had married was gone forever. In her place was someone he had never imagined possible, a woman who could look her abuser in the eye and feel nothing but contempt for his weakness. The trial was over. Now came the wait for justice. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Elena sat in the courthouse cafeteria with Patricia, Michelle, and the other victims, trying to eat lunch while her stomach churned with anxiety. Harrison Beck kept checking his phone for updates from the clerk's office. 4 hours is fast, Patricia said nervously. Is that good or bad? In a case this complicated, fast usually means the evidence was overwhelming, Beck replied. But you never know with juries. Elena felt surprisingly calm. She had done everything she could do, testified truthfully, provided evidence, and faced her abuser with courage. Whatever the jury decided, she could live with herself knowing she had fought back. At 2:30 p.m., Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Prosecutor Park. "Jury has reached a verdict. Back in courtroom in 30 minutes. Elena's heart started racing as she walked back into the packed courtroom. Robert sat at the defense table looking confident, probably still believing his charm and intelligence would save him. He had spent his entire criminal career underestimating women. Apparently, he was going to continue that pattern right to the end. Judge Patricia Henderson called the court to order and asked the jury foreman to read the verdict. Elena held her breath as the foreman, a middle-aged man who reminded her of her father, stood to speak. On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Elena felt her knees go weak. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs as the foreman continued reading. On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of mail fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The list went on 18 separate felony charges, and Robert was found guilty on every single count. Elena looked at him and saw his confident expression crumble as the reality of his situation finally hit him. Judge Henderson thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. As the bailiff led Robert away in shackles, he looked back at Elena with pure hatred in his eyes. For just a moment, Elena saw the rage that had always been lurking beneath his charming facade. Outside the courthouse, Elena faced a mob of reporters and camera crews. She had prepared a brief statement, but standing there in the afternoon sun, surrounded by the other women Robert had victimized, she felt compelled to speak from her heart. Today's verdict is not just about punishing Robert Thompson, Elena said, looking directly into the cameras. It's about sending a message to financial predators everywhere that their victims will not stay silent forever. It's about showing other women who are being abused and manipulated that they can fight back and win. Elena paused, thinking about the woman she had been just 8 months earlier, trusting, naive, completely dependent on a man who was systematically destroying her life. I want to thank the FBI agents, prosecutors, and investigators who believed our stories and fought for justice. I want to thank the other victims who had the courage to come forward and testify. And I want to thank my father, who even from beyond the grave found a way to protect his daughter and his legacy. Elena looked at Patricia and Michelle, who were standing beside her with tears in their eyes. Robert Thompson thought he was smarter than all of us. He thought we would stay quiet, stay ashamed, and stay broken. He was wrong on all counts. Today, his victims became his judges, and justice has been served. The questions from reporters came fast and loud, but Elena was done talking for the day. She had said what she needed to say. The rest would come later. 6 weeks later, Elena returned to the courthouse for Robert's sentencing hearing. She had written a victim impact statement that she planned to read to the judge, but she wasn't sure she would be able to get through it without breaking down. The courtroom was less crowded this time, but all of Robert's victims were present. Victoria Sterling had been sentenced the week before to 7 years in federal prison for her role in the conspiracy. Her cooperation had earned her a reduced sentence, but she would still serve significant time for her crimes. Robert's lawyers had filed dozens of motions seeking a reduced sentence, arguing that he was a first-time offender who had shown remorse for his actions. Elena almost laughed at this characterization. Robert was many things, but remorseful was not one of them. Judge Henderson called the hearing to order and invited the victims to make their impact statements. Patricia went first, describing how Robert's theft had destroyed her family's restaurant legacy and left her struggling financially for over a decade. Michelle followed, explaining how losing her grandmother's estate had affected not just her, but her children who had been counting on that inheritance for their college educations. When Elena's turn came, she walked to the podium with her written statement, but then found herself speaking directly from her heart instead. Your Honor, Robert Thompson didn't just steal money from me. He stole 25 years of my life, my ability to trust other people, and my connection to my father's legacy. He made me believe I was loved while he was actually calculating how much my trust was worth in dollars and cents. Elena looked directly at Robert, who was sitting at the defense table staring straight ahead. But Robert made one crucial mistake. He underestimated his victims. He thought we would stay silent and ashamed. He thought we would blame ourselves for being fooled rather than blame him for being a thief. He was wrong. Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued. Robert thought he was building a criminal empire, but what he actually built was a network of strong women who refused to be silenced. His crimes brought us together, and together we brought him down. That's the legacy of Robert Thompson, not the money he stole, but the courage he inspired in his victims to fight back. Elena returned to her seat, feeling emotionally drained but satisfied. She had said everything she needed to say. Judge Henderson reviewed the evidence and the sentencing guidelines before addressing Robert directly. Mr. Thompson, you have been convicted of 18 federal felonies involving the systematic theft of nearly $40 million over more than 20 years. Your crimes were not crimes of passion or desperation, they were calculated, premeditated attacks on vulnerable women who trusted you. The judge paused, looking at Robert with undisguised contempt. You have shown no remorse for your actions, no empathy for your victims, and no acknowledgement of the devastating impact your crimes have had on multiple families. You are a career criminal who poses a continuing danger to society. Elena held her breath as Judge Henderson announced the sentence. On the conspiracy to commit wire fraud charge, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. On the identity theft charges, I sentence you to 5 years, to run consecutively. On the money laundering charges, I sentence you to 10 years, to run consecutively. Combined with the other charges, your total sentence is 42 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Elena gasped. 42 years meant Robert would likely die in prison. At 52 years old, he would be in his 90s if he ever saw freedom again. Robert's face went white as the reality of his sentence hit him. 42 years. His carefully planned retirement in the Cayman Islands had become a life sentence in federal prison. Furthermore, Judge Henderson continued, I order complete restitution to all victims in the amount of $38 million, to be paid from the liquidation of all defendants' assets, including properties, vehicles, artwork, and offshore accounts. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, justice, and closure. Robert would never hurt another woman. His victims would recover their stolen money. And the world would know that financial predators could not act with impunity. As the bailiff led Robert away in shackles, he looked back at Elena one final time. But the hatred in his eyes had been replaced by something else, defeat. For the first time in his criminal career, Robert Thompson had encountered victims who were stronger than he was. Outside the courthouse, Elena was surrounded by reporters again, but this time she felt ready to talk about the future rather than the past. Today's sentence sends a clear message, Elena said. Financial predators who target women will face the full force of the law. But more importantly, it shows other victims that they don't have to suffer in silence. Justice is possible even when it seems hopeless. A reporter asked Elena what she planned to do next. I'm starting a foundation to help other victims of financial fraud, Elena replied. The Elena Thompson Foundation will provide legal support, financial counseling, and emotional support to women who have been victimized by financial predators. We're going to make sure Robert's victims become Robert's legacy, a force for protecting other women. Patricia and Michelle had already agreed to join Elena's foundation. Together, they would use their experience and recovered assets to help other women fight back against financial abuse. Robert thought he was building a criminal empire, Elena concluded. Instead, he built a movement of strong women who refused to be victims. That's his real legacy. 3 months after Robert's sentencing, Elena received a letter from him in prison. She almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of her. The letter was exactly what she expected, no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just anger and self-pity. Robert blamed Elena for destroying his life, and claimed he had been railroaded by an unfair legal system. Elena read the letter once, then fed it into her paper shredder. Robert still didn't understand that he was responsible for his own downfall. He still saw himself as the victim of other people's actions rather than the architect of his own destruction. But Elena didn't care what Robert thought anymore. His opinion had no power over her life, and his words couldn't hurt her. She had moved far beyond caring about the approval or disapproval of the man who had stolen 25 years of her life. Elena folded the shredded pieces of Robert's letter into an envelope and mailed them back to him with a note. You taught me that actions have consequences. Enjoy learning that lesson for the next 42 years. It was the last communication she would ever have with Robert Thompson. The chapter of her life that he had dominated was finally, completely closed. 1 year after Robert's conviction, Elena stood in the conference room of the Elena Thompson Foundation, looking out at a table full of women who had come to her for help. Each woman had a different story, but they all shared the common experience of being financially abused by someone they trusted. There was Jennifer, whose husband had forged her name on documents to refinance their house and disappear with the money. There was Carol, whose boyfriend had convinced her to invest her retirement savings in a fake business venture. There was Maria, whose brother had stolen her inheritance while she was caring for their dying mother. The most important thing to remember, Elena told the group, is that what happened to you was not your fault. Financial predators are skilled manipulators who target good people's trust and compassion. Being victimized doesn't make you weak or stupid, it makes you human. Elena's foundation had helped over 200 women in its first year of operation. They provided legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support to women who were fighting to recover their stolen assets and rebuild their lives. The foundation was funded primarily by Elena's recovered assets and donations from other fraud victims who had successfully prosecuted their cases. Patricia Williams had used her recovered money to expand the foundation's legal services. Michelle Rodriguez had created a scholarship program for children whose college funds had been stolen by financial predators. We're turning our worst experiences into our greatest strengths, Elena often told new clients. We're using what we learned as victims to protect other women from going through the same thing. Elena's personal life had also undergone a complete transformation. She had moved into a beautiful downtown loft, returned to school to get her master's degree in social work, and developed a close network of genuine friends who supported her work and her healing process. She had been asked out on dates by several men, but Elena wasn't ready for romantic relationships yet. She was still learning to trust her own judgment about people, and she wanted to be completely healed before opening her heart to anyone new. I spent 25 years in a relationship that was built on lies, Elena told her therapist. I want to make sure that when I'm ready to love again, it's with someone who sees me as a complete person, not as a means to an end. Elena's story had become a national phenomenon. She had written a best-selling book about her experience, appeared on dozens of television shows, and spoken at conferences across the country. But she always used her platform to focus attention on other victims rather than seeking personal fame. My story only matters if it helps other women tell their stories, Elena said during a speech at a women's conference in Chicago. The real heroes are the women who find the courage to fight back against their abusers, even when they feel scared and alone. Elena had also reconciled with members of her father's family who had been estranged during Robert's manipulation. Her father's brother, Uncle Frank, had tried to warn her about Robert years earlier, but Robert had convinced Elena that Frank was jealous of their success. I should have listened to you, Elena told Frank during an emotional reunion. You saw through Robert when I couldn't. You weren't ready to hear it then, Frank replied kindly. Sometimes we have to discover the truth for ourselves before we can accept it. Your father would be proud of how you fought back. Elena had used some of her recovered assets to restore Thompson Industries, the family business that Robert had systematically destroyed. Under Elena's leadership, the company was thriving again, and she had hired several women from her foundation as employees. We're rebuilding more than just a business, Elena told her staff. We're rebuilding the legacy that my father intended, a company that lifts up families and communities instead of tearing them down. On the first anniversary of Robert's sentencing, Elena visited her father's grave for the first time since his funeral. She brought flowers and a copy of her book, which was dedicated to his memory. Dad, I finally understand what you were trying to protect me from, Elena said aloud, not caring if anyone heard her talking to a headstone. You gave me the tools I needed to fight back even when I was too trusting to use them right away. Thank you for believing I was strong enough to handle the truth. Elena had learned that her father's private investigator, Frank Morrison, had continued monitoring Robert even after her father's death. When Elena's foundation work made national news, Morrison had contacted her with additional evidence of Robert's crimes that had never been used in the trial. Your father made me promise to keep watching Robert until you were safe, Morrison explained. He knew you would eventually discover the truth, and he wanted to make sure you had everything you needed to protect yourself when that day came. Elena was amazed by the depth of her father's love and protection. Even from the grave, he had been looking out for her welfare and preparing for her eventual awakening. Robert's other victims had also rebuilt their lives in inspiring ways. Patricia Williams had used her recovered money to open a new restaurant that employed several women from domestic violence shelters. Michelle Rodriguez had become a financial literacy teacher, helping other women understand how to protect their assets from predators. We're not just survivors anymore, Patricia said during a foundation board meeting. We're educators, advocates, and protectors. Robert thought he was destroying us, but he actually created an army of women who are dedicated to stopping men like him. Elena smiled at Patricia's observation. It was true, Robert's crimes had created a network of strong, determined women who were now using their experience to protect others. His attempt to destroy them had instead empowered them to become forces for justice and healing. 2 years after Robert's conviction, Elena received word that he had died in federal prison. A heart attack, the warden reported. He was 54 years old. Elena felt no satisfaction in Robert's death, but she also felt no sadness. Robert had chosen his path, and his path had led him to die alone in a prison cell, unmourned by anyone who had truly known him. He spent his whole life taking from people, Elena reflected to her therapist. In the end, he had nothing left to give, not even to himself. Elena attended a small memorial service organized by Robert's defense attorney, more out of closure than respect. Only a handful of people were present, lawyers, a few distant relatives who barely knew him, and Elena herself. No one spoke about Robert's life or accomplishments because there was nothing positive to say. His entire existence had been dedicated to stealing from others and causing pain. In death, as in life, Robert Thompson had left behind only emptiness and regret. After the service, Elena walked to her car feeling lighter than she had in years. The man who had dominated her life for 25 years was finally, truly gone. She was free to build whatever future she chose, without fear that he might somehow return to destroy it. 5 years after the broken ficus pot changed her life forever, Elena stood before a crowd of 500 women at the annual conference of the Elena Thompson Foundation. The foundation now operated in 15 states and had helped over 2,000 women recover from financial abuse. When I found that evidence in my husband's plant pot, Elena told the audience, I thought my life was ending. I thought I had lost everything that mattered, my marriage, my trust, my financial security, and my faith in my own judgment. Elena paused, looking out at the faces of women who had traveled from across the country to attend the conference. But I was wrong. I hadn't lost everything, I had found everything. I found my strength, my voice, my purpose, and my power. I found out that being a victim is something that happens to you, but being a survivor is something you choose to become. The audience erupted in applause, but Elena held up her hand to continue. Robert Thompson thought he was stealing my future when he stole my money. Instead, he gave me a future I never could have imagined, a future where I help other women reclaim their power and rebuild their lives. He thought he was my destroyer, but he actually became my greatest teacher. Elena's voice grew strong and clear as she delivered her closing message. To every woman in this room who has been betrayed, manipulated, or abused, you are not broken. You are not stupid. You are not responsible for someone else's criminal behavior. You are strong, you are valuable, and you deserve justice, healing, and happiness. Elena looked directly into the cameras that were broadcasting her speech live. And to any financial predator who might be watching this, know that your victims are no longer silent. We have found our voices, we have found each other, and we are coming for you. Your days of operating in darkness are over. As Elena left the stage to thunderous applause, she thought about the woman she had been 5 years earlier, the trusting wife who had accidentally broken her husband's ficus pot and discovered a truth that shattered her world. That woman was gone forever, but Elena didn't mourn her loss. That woman had been living a lie, trusting a thief, and wasting her potential on someone who saw her as nothing more than a means to financial gain. The woman Elena had become was someone she could respect, a fighter, a leader, a protector of other women, and a force for justice in a world that too often ignored financial crimes against women. Elena Thompson had risen from the ashes of Robert's betrayal like a phoenix, stronger and more beautiful than she had ever been before. The broken ficus pot had revealed not just Robert's crimes, but Elena's own capacity for courage, justice, and transformation. She had spent 25 years being Robert's victim. She would spend the rest of her life being her own hero. As Elena walked out of the conference center into the bright afternoon sunlight, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, complete and total freedom. Freedom from lies, from manipulation, from fear, and from the past. The future stretched out before her like an open road, full of possibilities she was finally free to explore. Elena Thompson had broken more than just a ficus pot, she had broken the chains that had bound her to a life of deception and dependence. Now she was free to build whatever life she chose, surrounded by people who valued her for who she truly was rather than what she could provide them. Elena smiled as she walked toward her car, thinking of all the women whose lives she would help transform in the years to come. Robert had thought he was creating victims, but he had actually created an army of survivors who would never again allow predators to operate in darkness. The broken ficus pot had revealed the truth. Elena Thompson had transformed that truth into justice, healing, and hope for countless other women. It was the best revenge of all, turning Robert's crimes into a force for protecting the very people he had tried to destroy.